and I said that all actors should be treated like cattle.
Alfred Hitchcock revealed the 9 Golden Age actors who were actually evil. Memory can be a trickster, polishing reputations until the past feels more myth than truth. Hollywood's Golden Age, its glowing lights, velvet gowns, and carefully sculpted legends, is remembered as a sanctuary of charm. Yet, behind the gloss, the shadows told another story.
But for some inexplicable reason, they like to, how shall I say,
Hitchcock, the master of suspense, knew those shadows well. His films, Rear Window, Vertigo, Psycho, were about appearances hiding menace. Off-screen, he confided that the same duplicity thrived among the stars audiences adored. To him, some actors were not just difficult, they carried a cruelty that poisoned those around them. What happens when a matinee idol is a tyrant to the crew? When a fragile screen heroine becomes ruthless in real life? Hitchcock, with his eye for weakness, claimed he had seen these transformations firsthand. Studios guarded reputations like state secrets, deploying publicists and staged photo ops to bury the mess, while crews whispered stories no one could silence. Here are 9 stars Hitchcock believed were not merely flawed, but truly destructive, and why their names still cast shadows over Hollywood's memory.
And they asked me how many pictures I had made, and I said,
Joan Crawford, the Hollywood queen with ice in her veins. Crawford's image was one of resilience and elegance, but Hitchcock reportedly saw another side, a performer whose ambition turned ruthless. On set, whispers circled about her temper, her sharp tongue, and her willingness to crush rivals who threatened her spotlight. In Hitchcock's telling, the real suspense was not in her films. It was in how far she would go to maintain control. She had risen from hardship, clawing her way into the highest ranks of Hollywood. That hunger gave her drive, but Hitchcock believed it also bred hostility. Crew members described working with her as a delicate dance, never knowing when kindness might turn into cruelty. For those who crossed her, she could be merciless, cutting them down with words sharper than any director's note. Hitchcock pointed to her rivalries as proof. Younger actresses, he claimed, were quietly undermined with icy precision. Crawford never lost a battle for the spotlight. She only changed the weapons she used. Her feud with Bette Davis was legendary, but to Hitchcock it revealed a hunger for dominance that bordered on obsession. Even in her most acclaimed roles, Mildred Pierce, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, critics sensed steel beneath the glamour. Hitchcock suggested that her performances were not invention but revelation. To him, Crawford embodied Hollywood's paradox, adored for strength, yet feared for the cruelty behind her polish, a storm disguised as a star.
It's not to be repeated, but gentlemen, be seated, and I'll tell you where I've been.
Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler with a sinister reputation. Flynn's daring sword fights and devil-may-care grin made him Hollywood's great adventurer. Yet Hitchcock noted the cruel irony. Flynn's off-screen life bristled with scandal, accusations, and predatory behavior. Behind the cape and charm, Hitchcock suggested, was a man who weaponized charisma in darker ways. On screen, he was the people's hero, swinging from ropes in Captain Blood, stealing kisses in The Adventures of Robin Hood. But Hitchcock warned that the line between performance and reality grew dangerously thin. Stories circulated of Flynn's reckless indulgence, fueled by alcohol, women, and a belief that rules were meant for others. He lived like his characters, only without the noble restraint that made audiences cheer. Hitchcock, fascinated by masks, described Flynn's as one of Hollywood's most convincing. He played a rogue on screen and lived as though the role required no curtain call. Allegations of assault and scandal followed Flynn for decades, yet studios shielded him, unwilling to risk their most bankable star. For Hitchcock, the greater tragedy was not only Flynn's behavior, but the industry's complicity. The audience adored a gallant outlaw, never realizing that his charm concealed something predatory. To Hitchcock, Flynn embodied Hollywood's paradox at its darkest, the swashbuckler who thrilled millions, and the man whose real-life shadows proved more dangerous than any villain he fought on screen.
In khaki boots, GB looks swell, full of that, yeah, that looks...
Judy Garland, the voice broken by exploitation. Garland symbolized innocence on screen, yet Hitchcock was candid about how studios twisted that innocence into control. He recalled her struggles not as weakness, but as the result of an industry complicit in her suffering. For him, Garland's story was less about talent and more about what power unchecked could do to a soul. From her earliest years at MGM, Garland was treated less as a prodigy and more as property. She was given stimulants to stay awake, sedatives to force sleep, and diets so strict they bordered on cruelty. Hitchcock described this not as management but manipulation, an industry robbing her of childhood while shaping her into a commodity. Even her triumphs carried a haunting undertone. In The Wizard of Oz, audiences saw Dorothy's wide-eyed innocence. Behind the scenes, Hitchcock noted, Garland was already learning that innocence had a price. Her gift was her voice, but it was also her cage. As Garland matured, the cycle deepened. Applause followed by exhaustion, performances followed by collapse. Hitchcock, a man obsessed with masks, saw Garland's as one of the most tragic and revealing. To him, she was not evil herself, but the victim of evil inflicted upon her. A reminder that sometimes the cruelty of Hollywood was not in its stars, but in the machine that devoured them whole.
I don't really like the word genius, but the theater can quite cope with genius.
Laurence Olivier, the genius who demanded cruelty. Olivier's towering performances made him the crown jewel of stage and screen. Hitchcock, however, remarked that Olivier's brilliance came with cruelty toward co-stars, protégés, even those he loved. Perfection was his demand, and Hitchcock noted the destruction it left in its wake. On stage, Olivier was unmatched. His Hamlet and Othello became definitive performances, studied and revered for decades. Yet Hitchcock suggested that the same intensity he poured into Shakespeare became a weapon in rehearsal rooms. Stories circulated of Olivier belittling young actors, pushing them past breaking points, insisting that pain itself was a necessary ingredient for art. Even in his films, from Wuthering Heights to Rebecca, Olivier's presence dominated not just the screen, but the set. Hitchcock, who directed him in Rebecca, observed how Olivier's pursuit of control often meant diminishing others, leaving behind bruised egos and fractured trust. He sought perfection, but at the cost of compassion. His relationships bore the same mark. Colleagues described a man who demanded loyalty, yet repaid it with sharpness when expectations faltered. For Hitchcock, Olivier embodied a paradox, the actor whose artistry reshaped cinema, but whose cruelty scarred those around him. To Hitchcock, Olivier proved that brilliance without empathy could be as destructive as failure. Genius may inspire awe, but it can also leave behind wreckage too heavy to ignore.
I was never tough, you just learn to cope. I was never a tough person.
Bette Davis. The Storm in High Heels. Davis's fire made her unforgettable, but Hitchcock warned it could be dangerous. On set, her confrontations with directors and actors blurred the line between artistry and intimidation. Hitchcock admired her skill, but he did not excuse the battles she relished. To him, her power was both her gift and her weapon. Known for All About Eve and Jezebel, Davis forged characters who were sharp, uncompromising, and often merciless. Hitchcock suggested that the intensity audiences loved was not far removed from her real nature. She was said to challenge directors openly, refusing to compromise, and to turn rehearsals into contests of will, leaving colleagues exhausted. Her most infamous rivalry with Joan Crawford only amplified that reputation. To Hitchcock, their feud was not just a clash of egos, but a window into Davis's appetite for confrontation. She fought as if every scene were a battlefield. For Davis, struggle was part of creation, but Hitchcock believed it often became destructive. Colleagues spoke of her brilliance, but also the tension she left in her wake. Hitchcock, a master of controlled sets, saw in Davis an uncontrollable storm. To him, she symbolized the peril of unrestrained force, artistry capable of brilliance, yet equally capable of leaving scars that lingered long after the camera stopped rolling.
Okay, say hello to him too. No, it did.
Montgomery Clift, the angel undone by demons. Clift embodied sensitivity on screen, a face of vulnerability that reshaped acting itself. Hitchcock, though, saw the tragedy beneath. An actor undone by self-destruction, by choices that wounded those closest to him. His talent was undeniable, but Hitchcock believed his spiral revealed a quiet cruelty, to himself and to others. Clift's arrival in Hollywood marked a revolution. In films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity, he rejected the stiff postures of earlier stars, choosing instead to act with raw interiority. Audiences saw honesty in every glance, every hesitation. Yet Hitchcock suggested that same sensitivity made him fragile, a man ill-prepared for the pressures of stardom. His 1956 car accident left him disfigured, and from that point, his dependence on alcohol and painkillers deepened. Hitchcock described the aftermath not only as personal tragedy, but as a shadow cast over collaborators forced to work around his decline. His suffering became everyone's burden. Friends remained loyal, but Hitchcock noted how Clift's recklessness drained those bonds. His talent remained, yet his demons consumed the very trust that artistry requires. To Hitchcock, Clift's story was less about genius than about collapse, the angel who redefined performance, but who left scars in the lives he touched on his way down, scars that never fully healed.
Dejection, desertion, beautiful woman.
Marlene Dietrich, the seductress who bent rules to her will. Dietrich enchanted audiences with her mystery and allure. Hitchcock remembered her differently, a master manipulator who used her charm to dominate co-stars and directors alike. To him, her brilliance lay not just in performance, but in the ruthless control she demanded over every room she entered. From the Blue Angel to Morocco, Dietrich built her persona as an untouchable figure, half goddess, half enigma. Hitchcock suggested that this persona was no mere act. She calculated every move, using her glamour as both shield and weapon. Directors admired her presence, yet many admitted she quietly dictated the terms of her performances. Stories followed of her ability to charm powerful men while cutting down rivals with precision. She played seduction like chess, every smile a strategy. Hitchcock noted that her charisma was so formidable, it often disarmed those who should have challenged her. Instead, they yielded, giving her the control she craved and rarely surrendered. Behind the camera, Dietrich was said to dominate lighting choices, wardrobe decisions, even story beats. Hitchcock respected her intelligence but regarded her methods as ruthless. To him, Dietrich embodied the danger of unchecked allure, an actress who understood that beauty could be weaponized and who bent Hollywood to her will not with kindness, but with power sharpened to a blade.
All the best young directors are soaked in films.
Orson Welles, the prodigy who thought rules were beneath him. Welles shattered convention with Citizen Kane, but Hitchcock described his genius as double-edged. To Hitchcock, Welles's arrogance poisoned collaborations. He was a man who treated filmmaking as his empire, dismissing anyone who challenged his vision. Hitchcock admired the artistry, but saw in him the shadow of tyranny. From his Mercury Theater days to the innovation of Kane, Welles seemed untouchable. He introduced radical camera angles, narrative daring, and performances of startling realism. Yet Hitchcock suggested his brilliance often came at the expense of others. Collaborators described him as dismissive, quick to belittle, and unwilling to concede creative ground. His later career only deepened that reputation. Welles clashed with studios, fought over final cuts, and alienated producers who once championed him. Welles demanded loyalty but offered little in return. Hitchcock recognized the tragedy. The same arrogance that fueled his early triumphs also ensured his exile from the system, leaving him adrift. On set, Welles's magnetism could dominate, but Hitchcock believed it created a climate of fear rather than trust. Where Hitchcock built suspense from collaboration, Welles imposed control by force. To Hitchcock, Welles embodied the peril of unchecked genius, a visionary who rewrote cinema, but whose contempt for limits left behind as much ruin as glory, a warning disguised as brilliance. Charlie Chaplin, the clown whose mask concealed darkness. Chaplin was cinema's first global star, adored for his pathos and comedy. Yet Hitchcock whispered that behind the little tramp's smile lay unsettling truths: manipulation, obsession, scandals the industry worked hard to bury. Hitchcock, the student of human weakness, called Chaplin proof that even the most beloved masks could hide something dangerous. With The Kid, City Lights, and Modern Times, Chaplin embodied innocence, resisting the cruelty of modern life. But Hitchcock noted the irony. The man who symbolized kindness on screen could be ruthless off it. Chaplin was notorious for controlling every aspect of his productions, from directing to scoring, often pushing collaborators beyond endurance. His personal life cast deeper shadows. Relationships with much younger women, bitter divorces, and political controversies fueled a public unease that Hollywood often attempted to shield. Chaplin built comedy from compassion, but lived as though compassion were optional. For Hitchcock, the troubling part was not only the scandals, but how they clashed with the saintly figure audiences adored. The Mask of the Tramp was too perfect, too convincing, concealing a man of contradictions and uncomfortable truths. To him, Chaplin stood as the ultimate paradox, the artist who gave the world laughter and tears, yet whose private life revealed how even joy could be weaponized by ego and control. Hitchcock revealed the 9 Golden Age actors who were actually evil, but his revelations were never about scandal for its own sake. They were about the fragility of image, the truth that brilliance and cruelty can coexist within the same person. Hollywood sold perfection, yet Hitchcock understood that perfection is an illusion, and illusions eventually collapse. These stories remind us that fame does not absolve, and artistry does not erase the wounds left behind. The actors who shaped the Golden Age also carried shadows that linger in their legacies, a reminder that human greatness is inseparable from human weakness. So when we look back on Hollywood's shining icons, we must also reckon with the darkness that shaped them. Because Hitchcock's lesson endures, even the brightest image can be projected by the darkest soul. Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories like this.